Hello and welcome. I am Perla Karney, Artistic Director of the Dortort Center for Creativity in the Arts at UCLA Hillel. Thank you for joining us to today's program, From Berlin to Los Angeles, the Future of Jewish Museums, with our distinguished guests, Hetty Berg, Director of the Jewish Museum Berlin, Europe's largest Jewish museum, Jessie Kornberg, President and CEO of the Skirball Cultural Center, the leading Jewish cultural center in California, and our moderator, Professor Sarah Abrevaya Stein, Director of the UCLA Alan D. Leve Center for Jewish Studies, the largest Jewish academic center in the United States. Welcoming the stranger is the core principle of Judaism. We are told 36 times in the Torah to love the stranger, welcome the stranger, care for the stranger, not oppress the stranger, for we were once strangers in the land of Egypt. Living up to that responsibility will help that stranger to become our neighbor. Jewish museums aim to fulfill that mission of turning a stranger to our heritage, culture, and history into a neighbor and a friend. Thank you, Hetty, Jessie, and Sarah, for participating in our program today. We look forward to hearing your insights of what it means to be global leaders in the world of Jewish museums, especially during a pandemic. I also want to thank my colleague, Giselle Goldwater-Feldman, for organizing the program and being in charge of the Zoom, as well as our wonderful co-sponsors, in particular, Consul General of Germany, Stefan Schneider. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce the Director of Hillel at UCLA, Rabbi Aaron Lerner.
Thank you so much, Perla, and hello to so many friends, both here domestically in the United States, as well as new friends in Germany, in Europe, in Israel, people really from all around the world, able to join together in programs, really for the first time. There's not a lot of silver linings to everything that's happening in our world right now, but at least this is one of them, and I'm glad to be able to see everybody here on the call today. Perla, thank you for those words of Torah. We will elevate you to Rabbi at our next staff meeting. But I do think a lot about that question about what it means to be in a Jewish community where a lot of times my three daughters are actually separated from the stranger. They go to Jewish day school, we spend Shabbat in the neighborhood. And I do think about the ways in which education and exposure to others, in particular through the kinds of opportunities that are made available through museums or through the arts, are able to expose them in ways that they're not naturally getting during their week. So I want to start by thanking Hetty, Jessie, and Sarah for making that happen in our world. Hetty Berg, the director of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, which is Europe's largest museum. She has a 30-year career. She's established 30 temporary exhibitions, overseen the creation and implementation of 5 permanent exhibitions, worked in Amsterdam. My favorite part of your bio is the implementation of the Children's Museum as part of that project there. And you are able to meet the stranger by actually conversing with them in 6 different languages. So welcome, Hetty. Jessie Kornberg is a LA native and UCLA grad from the law school here. She is a social entrepreneur and the new president and CEO of the Skirball Cultural Center, which is really a premier institution here and around the world. She's got 2 decades of civil rights work, working in anti-poverty services at the largest provider of homeless family services in New York. She's worked for the NAACP. Now she's worked in a private law firm and opened litigation on behalf of death row inmates. I got to know her a little bit as the CEO of Beit Tzedek, which does important work here in Los Angeles, providing legal aid. And I just want to say to you personally, it's really wonderful to see a smart, young, dynamic female leader taking over one of the most important institutions here in the United States. Professor Stein, it's also great to have gotten to know you here at UCLA as the director of UCLA's Alan D. Leve Center for Jewish Studies. the largest academic center in the United States. You're a professor of history, the Viterbi Family Chair in Mediterranean Jewish Studies at UCLA, and the Sadie and Ludwig Kahn Director of UCLA's Alan D. Leve Center, a former Guggenheim Fellow, recipient of the Sammy Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature. Your works have been esteemed in The Economist as the best book of 2019, a New York Times Editor's Choice book, and the National Jewish Book Award finalist. It's a pleasure to have you all join us today, and I really look forward to the fabulous program.
Thank you, Rabbi Lerner, and welcome everyone, and thank you for the invitation to moderate this wonderful event. I have prepared a list of questions, which I have circulated with our guests in advance, and it seems inevitable that we would start with the moment we find ourselves in 2020 in all of its relentlessness and, of course, pandemic. So I thought I would begin by asking Hetty and Jessie if you could talk a little bit about how the Jewish Museum of Berlin, the Skirball Cultural Center in LA, have been weathering the pandemic and what it has meant for your curatorial plans, for your staff. Maybe in a moment, we'll go a little bit deeper and talk about what it has meant for the interface with the public. Hetty, would you want to begin?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Sarah, for your great questions. I started at the Jewish Museum in Berlin on the 1st of April. So that was already in the middle of the Corona pandemic. And when I started, the museum had been closed for 2 weeks already. And since then, the pandemic has constantly put us for new challenges to which you have to respond quickly and at short notice. But the biggest pain this year was the cancellation of a very big opening event of the new permanent exhibition and the new Children's World Anoa, a new children's museum, which was planned for the middle of May. And so the big party, everything we had thought of had to be cancelled. And but fortunately, we were able to reopen the museum at the end of August. Everything much more moderate. We had visitors in that was the best moment to see the visitors again in the building, but they all had to have these time slot tickets, very limited amounts, but at least, the institution was alive again. But then, since the beginning of November, we are closed again. So this is at the moment, we don't know when we will be able to open the Children's Museum because we only opened the new permanent exhibition. And yeah, this is, we have to wait and see what we can do. But besides all the restrictions imposed by the shutdown, I also feel the very positive energy of the colleagues in the museum. People remain motivated despite the many cancellations. And we also had a chance to experiment with new digital offerings, and also like tonight, I don't think this would ever have happened, or nobody would have thought of doing this if it was not Corona. So also a lot of boundaries are being crossed because we have to be inventive, and new formats are being developed. But also the shutdown has reminded us that that the central premise of our work cannot be taken for granted, which is that the museum is first and foremost a meeting place, a place for physical encounters with objects, with other visitors, with the past and present, with different cultures and public spheres. So how will we make such encounters possible and provide a framework for them in the future? And as in many other areas of our society, the pandemic is also drawing attention to a much larger and deeper question we feel at the Jewish Museum Berlin. And that is, how can museums be a safe space in which such physical encounters and conversations are possible, which outside in a world increasingly aggressive and polarized and marked by exclusion, fail more and more often. So I think that the Jewish Museum Berlin will need more than distant rules and face masks to find answers to these questions, which are fundamental to our society.
Thank you. A fascinating set of answers. And I want to return to some of the themes that you mentioned, especially this question of safety, a meeting place, and what pandemic changes for us, for museums for the future. But first, let me let Jessie jump in on that broader question of simply the weathering.
Thank you. And I want to say it's so lovely to see familiar faces and names on this gathering. I saw Jay Abarbanel, who is one of our founding champions at Bet Tzedek, and Patty Glazer, who's one of my professional heroes, and so many colleagues from Skirball on the Zoom. So I just want to tell you how happy I am to be in community with you this morning. And of course with Hetty, who I join in coming to my team in the middle of this pandemic. I started in July. And so of course, by that time, Skirball had been closed for several months. And we have had, very active, I think ambitious, but difficult conversations since then about how we continue to serve our audiences and our members during this period. Unlike Berlin, we have not been permitted to reopen in any capacity. And I don't expect that we will be permitted to reopen very soon. And so, these questions will continue to be our guiding questions for quite some time. And it is difficult, again, a difference between American museums and European institutions. We rely to a very significant degree on our earned income from private events and rentals, from ticket sales and, gifts bought at the gift shop, etc. And so it is not just a question of our purpose during this time, but also of our sustainability. We know from the American Association of Museums that more than 30% of museums in this country do not anticipate ever being able to reopen. For Skirball, it is not an existential question. I feel very, very grateful to those who built the Skirball and built its financial foundations, that we come to this moment with a sense of confidence that we will be able to afford to reopen, however long it takes. And that is a true gift and a testament to the strength of our steadfast supporters. But there are still very serious questions about how long you sustain your team when none of them can work and none of us can create revenue. I'm, very pleased to share that Skirball has not laid off or furloughed or reduced headcount, in response to COVID, and it is our plan to maintain our team because we think Skirball is Skirballers, right? But that is a challenge for institutions like ours and a question that we are grappling with almost daily. So it is weathering something, to be sure. And I know we're going to have a chance to talk more about the specific things that we've done digitally and innovation. And I think I hear the word pivot 7 times a day, right? But I will just say, again, here in Los Angeles, a core challenge for us is reaching people who are made so distant by COVID, who would normally have physical access to campus. So, normally Skirball would provide support to bus Title I and other underserved classroom children up to our campus to come to our exhibitions, to receive art instruction. And, there is no digital equivalent to that because the digital divide in Los Angeles, like much of the United States, is so pronounced. And so more than 75% of the school children we would normally serve don't have access to the internet right now. And so I will also just flag, while we have, I think, done really good, fun, mission aligned work, thinking about what we can do online, we are talking every single day at Skirball about the people we believe we are built to serve who cannot find us on the internet, and how we are going to continue to be of service to those folks and those households. And so some of that looks like delivering, packets, art kits, seed kits, creativity kits, physical items through service partners in community to at-risk families and children in need. And we have done that work. Part of it looks like encouraging our staff who are home and unable to perform their core job functions from home, encouraging them in an official way to volunteer in community to serve those same households, because there are lots of things we can do through volunteerism, including serving in food banks and other kinds of food delivery services, and other kinds of aid work. And so we can encourage our team to be of service to community, though in a very different way than they were originally hired to be. And so those are some of the things that we've been doing sort of in addition to the innovative programming that I think speak directly to the core challenge of COVID, like a museum, for a museum like ours.
Thank you. These are such complex and fascinating questions. And it seems to me that one could hardly say that COVID is the best of times and the worst of times, but in the worst of times, it seems to me, stimulating questions that also need to be asked in the best of times. So Hetty, you've spoken about physical security, security of health, the anxiety of these openings and closings and affording access and denying access. And Jessie, you are addressing questions of economic equity and equal access to cultural treasures in Los Angeles and beyond, as well as this very probing question of how a museum ought to consider its community and its space, its physical or rather more metaphysical space. So I wonder if I could ask you to dig a little bit deeper, and then we will turn to the more Jewishly specific questions that arise, I think, from your institutions. But if I could ask you to dig a little bit deeper on the question of how pandemic is allowing you to reconsider what your mission is, who your community is, and how those things intersect, how and where and in what fashion those intersect. And if it is not possible that for the institutions you represent, there is a silver lining insofar as this crisis has prompted a reconsideration of these very questions that are so germane, so essential to the mission of museums in general and the institutions in particular that you lead. Maybe we'll reverse this time, and Jessie, I'll invite you to go first, and Hetty can follow up.
Sure. Well, I think, look, there are some very sort of literal ways in which our audience is changing, because we do have so much more programming online now, and people are accessing it from all over the world. And that's a lot of fun to see audience expand geographically. So that's great. But I think, to the larger question that you raise about what is our community and who are we serving, something I have been very cognizant of during this time is the sort of founding story of Skirball. Our founder, Uri Herscher, Skirball is in so many ways like a 15-acre manifestation of his life and philosophy, right? And when I've had the pleasure to get to know him a little, not as well as probably some people on this Zoom, but one of the things that seems to me to be part of his genius is that he has these two very contrasting life experiences in his formative years. He is in Israel among refugees from the Holocaust when he is born, and he is with the few family that survive. And his early childhood years are defined entirely by that escape and the grief and the loss of that time in that community. And he immigrates to the United States into an incredibly different environment. He's in California. He finds acceptance and welcome and so much opportunity and real joy in that. And he is remarkable in so many ways, of course, but one of them is that he carries both sides of that contrast with him in everything he does and thinks and says. And the darkness and the sadness brightens the lightness and the joy, right? That the history informs the future. And I think Skirball has been uniquely helpful and powerful and meaningful to so many audience members because it speaks directly to how past suffering can inform future meaning. And that, I carry that with me a lot when I think about what Skirball can mean to people. And I think about it right now because I think the horror and terror and sadness and loss that COVID is creating in many communities around us is, creating all of those same life experiences for children and families, right? So much loss right now, and so much suffering right now, and so much disconnection and isolation. And I think it's very important for Skirball in particular, given our founding and what has made us strong and resilient and helpful to people up until now, to find a way to stay very close to the experience of people who are having the very hardest time right now. And as I say, Skirball is actually, in many respects, insulated from the worst effects of this disease. It is not existential for our institution. But I think if our mission is going to continue to have the same level of resonance and impact in the future that it has had in the past, we need to be cognizant of the experiences of those worst affected by this moment. And we need to be incorporating that perspective and that experience in our work going forward. And so I don't think that changes our mission. And I don't think it changes who our community is. And I don't think it changes who our audience is if we actually deliver on that. But I think we need to work hard to make sure that we are proximate to the need and the experience right now so that we can serve the causes created by it and be a positive force in the rebuilding.
Thank you. Hetty, do you want to build on this?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting to hear already in our answers, the answers of Jessie and of me, in what very different contexts we are operating. And of course, we are very lucky in Germany, where the pandemic is really far less serious, let's say. I mean, I go every day to my work. There are many colleagues there, not everybody, people are in home office, but there's still this going on, and in that sense, there and we are funded by the German government, so also in financially, it's at the moment not threatening us. So it is a very different situation from many other museums and Jewish museums in Europe. And also in comparison with America, it's of course a very different case. What is with us a very, very big difference is that normally we have like 75% international tourists. So the few weeks that we were open and when we will reopen, hopefully soon, those visitors will not be there. And it was already one of my goals when I started this job, to get more German visitors and more Berliners in the museum, and also more people in the direct surrounding. Because when I hear Jessie speak, this feeling of community and of serving the direct community in your neighborhood or in your city, that is far less the case in the Jewish Museum Berlin, and that is something that I really want to work on, because I think it's a great opportunity and really a necessity, but of course also a challenge to get the people in, especially if I think that the museum has a role to play in society, but you can only play that role if you also reach the people that make up that society. And there also the Children's Museum, ANOA, which was inspired by the Skirball Museum, Children's Museum of Noah's Ark, will hopefully play a great role in that, where it will really become a cultural anchor in the neighborhood, and where we will, in this very mixed neighborhood where the museum is located, that we will be able to build more of a community there as well.
So I think transitioning from Hetty, your comments about the museum's location and interface with a multi-ethnic, diverse neighborhood, I might move us towards a question that I had first put last on our list, but in the interest of giving you ample time to respond to an issue that really seems at the heart of this program. I wanted to draw upon something that was said last year at a UCLA event when we were blessedly still meeting in person by, at the time, the Leve Center for Jewish Studies Leve Center Award winner of the year, who was Dr. Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet, a friend, a colleague, chief curator of the core exhibition, and an advisor to the director of Polin, the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. And she titled her lecture, "Risky Business, the Future of Jewish Museums." And Barbara argued that evening that certain museums, and maybe many Jewish museums, were at risk, in part because those institutions were not taking risks. So I would be curious to hear you reflect on, first of all, the question of whether Jewish museums have a future, and maybe really what the Jewish means in that sentence to you and your institutions. And also, how do you, as directors and curators, Hetty, in your case, how do you handle risk and controversy as representatives of the center and as you design curatorial plans for your institution? Hetty, maybe we'll begin with you this time.
Yeah, I'd like to start with maybe the first part of your question. And by chance, I spoke with Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet yesterday evening. I'm a great admirer of her work, and she's a big source of inspiration always for me. I think that if one institution was at risk in the previous year, it was the Jewish Museum Berlin, with all the political challenges it gave there, and also the interference with the institution from the side of the Israeli government. And I think that our museum, or the Berlin Museum, is a place where many different expectations and demands are coming from all kinds of sides, and they are high and sometimes quite contradictory. But of course, these expectations and demands increase the risk of conflict, but they also present the opportunity for the museum to become the very place where these conflicts are identified and can be discussed and addressed and maybe even resolved in some cases. And it's in this very complex position that we are in the moment in Germany, in Berlin, where many themes are discussed in a very sharp and, as I said, aggressive way, that it's almost also not possible anymore to discuss these things. So how to this is what I see as my wish for the future of the museum. So at one point, yes, there is a risk. At the other point, this is also the opportunity that we have to grab to do something about it and to play this important role in society to present people with a different culture that has been, in the case of Germany, already there for 1,700 years. And so far before there was any Germany, and to be a relevant space where there can be open debates and open discussions, and where people can encounter other people that are different, where otherness can be sustained. That can be, I don't know the right word for it in English, but where people can also bear to have different opinions, and that it is okay, that you can have different ideas and you can still discuss with each other, and that you don't have to agree. So that this whole idea of otherness in society is a positive point. And of course the otherness we show in the relationship of the Jews in the non-Jewish society over 1,700 years, with its ups and its very, very deep downs, are of course presented in the museum. And it has everything to do with today.
Wonderful, thank you. So I gather in your answer that you would carry on a tradition that your institution already was boasting of, I think, for some time, which is to not shy from risky topics or curatorial forms or interventions, but indeed to transform them into modes of engagement and intervention and inquiry, and to stimulate gathering. Jessie, it seems to me that the Skirball has historically a rather different relationship to controversy. How would you describe that history, and how do you see it segueing into the future under your direction?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say the question was really about museums. And I want to be clear that Skirball Cultural Center is not a museum. It includes a museum collection and gallery spaces. That was very purposefully designed to be something else. And there are a lot of museum goers who come to Skirball and experience a museum experience, but most of the people who come to Skirball experience something else. So I think that's something that is really central for me in thinking about, I will come to controversy, I promise, but I want to answer the first and larger question too. Something that I think about in my own Jewish identity and Jewish experience, something very different in mine compared to my father's. There's massive generational changes. And I grew up on the stories of my father's youth, spent traveling through Europe, sometimes to see family, sometimes with a destination, but other times just getting off at wherever the train stopped around dinner time. And whatever town that was, in any part of Europe, when he was in his, let's say teens or 20s, if he, walked into the center of town and found the shul and greeted whomever he found there in Yiddish, he could be assured of community that night, of a warm bed and a warm meal and good conversation and some kind of familiar surrounding, even in a totally foreign land. And that was true almost everywhere in the world. I mean, a remarkable number of places you could describe an evening like that. And that is simply not the case today. I need hardly tell the folks on this call, it's not true in America, and it's not true in Europe, and it's not true in really most of the world. That you could just come unannounced into any town and find an open synagogue and a human there to speak Yiddish with and enjoy a meal. And so I think for me, when we talk about what is the future of Jewish museums, or in Skirball's case, of a Jewish cultural center, I have to say, well, if there isn't a future, what is the future of Jewish communal life? Right? I don't, what are your alternative solutions to the vacuum of communal space for those of Jewish identity or interest in Jewish identity? 90% of Jews my age in this country are not affiliated with any kind of synagogal community. So your answer cannot just be synagogue. It doesn't work. To say that's where we will preserve history and memory and values and connection. And so, for me, what I hope is that Skirball Cultural Center, when we say it is a place of welcome and we welcome the stranger, well, that certainly applies to everyone equally. But as a Jew, it has been very powerful and meaningful to me to feel welcomed at Skirball, because it's a place where I get to be a Jew among other Jews of such variety. And you don't have that experience very often, very many places. I don't. And so I think, for me, I certainly hope there's a future because otherwise, I am so sad about what is the answer to the question of where we find each other and our history and our memory. That said, with respect to controversy, I don't think of Skirball as wading into or inviting controversy as a sort of standard operating procedure. It's not something I think we seek out. It's something I don't sort of think of as my key role in leadership. That said, we live in a time when it seems like all kinds of things that didn't used to be controversial are controversial now, and I'm continually surprised by something I think is a humanistic value or a sort of universal idea. And then it turns out it is politicized, unbeknownst to me. And so, there's no doubt that I'll be stepping in it someday soon, unintentionally, and controversy will find us wherever we are. But, what I have to just continue to use as our default are these core values on which Skirball Cultural Center has been built, which are not new at Skirball. They're 5,000 years old, right? And so they have withstood the test of time and all kinds of conflict and all kinds of adversity. And so when there is that moment of questioning, I will always ground myself in welcome the stranger, seek learning, pursue justice, honor memory, these values that are at the core of Jewish tradition and teaching and are the foundation of the Skirball Cultural Center.
Thank you. The floor is open for questions via the chat function. And I have been given a long list of questions to share with our speakers, more than we possibly have time for. But what I want to do is synthesize a few that have come in and share them with you. So there was a number of folks on the call who reacted with delight, but also amazement, Jessie, at what you said about the Skirball making the choice not to let anyone go during this moment of crisis, fiscal and health, and I imagine crisis of sort of quotidian operations at the Skirball. And both of you mentioned children coming into the space and working with schools. So I wonder if, and again, I'm drawing on questions that have been asked here by members of the audience, if you could speak a bit about collaborators not necessarily during pandemic, those institutions or community partners who you work with, perhaps especially with an emphasis on children's education and children's engagement with the cultural center of the museum. And I think that these questions are unified by, again, the amazement that was sparked by Jessie's comment about the decisions made by the Skirball Center not to let anyone go. And I'm quoting from that question asker's statement, who said, what hard choices are being made to elevate the importance of staff and people over objects? So again, thinking about relationships with institutions, especially with those institutions that bring children into the space, not necessarily under pandemic, but generally speaking. Hetty, would you be willing?
Yeah, thank you. We have always, luckily, a large visitor number of school groups and of educational programs, not only in the museum, but there are also several in and outreach programs. So there's the Jewish Museum Berlin on tour that go to far away from Berlin, to go to schools where it is for the children not really possible to come to the museum. So this kind of work has been developed over many, many years. And the museum was also very fortunate to have been able to have a very good digital department also already over many years. So there are also many digital programs already in place. And that is something that has become now much more to the forefront, that we can reach many, many more children in the whole of Germany by making these digital programs available also without anybody from the museum going there, because till now somebody would go to a place and then do the digital program with the children, but really to give the instructions also online, that they can do the work completely independent from any museum worker. And in the times between the end of August and beginning of November, when we were open, I was so surprised that there were so many school groups coming in. And of course we had done it all different, with distance and headphones and smaller groups, and but there was a huge interest of school groups to see the new permanent exhibition. And we developed many different programs also for this new permanent exhibition. And of course that is one of the very important ways of reaching the German population through these youngsters, and then hopefully soon also for the 3 till 10-year-olds in the Children's Museum. So this is something where we want to put a lot of extra effort, and so this is one of our main factors as well.
Thank you. Jessie, just to tweak the question a little bit for you, the question asker also invited you to share with us your the ways in which the Skirball interfaces with specifically other ethnic museums in Los Angeles. So that might also be, if you're willing, a part of your reflection, but I turn it to you.
Thank you. Well, first I want to say, I think the existing relationships that Skirball had with education providers and aid providers who work with child populations have really been key to our being able to connect with those same populations during COVID. And so, of course, all of the districts that we work with, we actually work with a network of Catholic schools and parochial schools through Catholic Charities, and then also schools targeted for particularly vulnerable populations. So schools like Para los Niños and other organizations that are designed explicitly to deliver aid and resources and support to specific populations of children in need, were existing partners before the pandemic, and of course have been so essential to our pandemic response. And so, you know, I'm actually just so proud. I like Cavell for a moment to say how proud I am that our education team, you know, the moment that the pandemic shutdowns, you know, were imminent, you know, they took a time, really months, before designing our digital curriculum to gather perspective from all of our teachers and advocates with whom we had previously worked. So the folks who had always signed up for field trips for their classes or applied for scholarships for our teacher training, or, you know, all of that kind of thing. They reached out to those professionals who were frontline now in this moment of crisis, and just had regular listening sessions over the spring to hear how remote learning was affecting their students and what kinds of resources would be more useful. And so as they develop, you know, as they started to develop our virtual curriculum, it was informed very much by the frontline experience of teachers, educators, and aid workers who were seeing the effects of remote learning on the populations that we want to serve. And so, you know, that's the first part, you know, how those partnerships inform the work now. They could not, it's bedrock. Like those partnerships have completely informed the work, right? And I'm really happy that that's how that developed. And then
does that include a relationship with LAUSD?
It does, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so in addition to public districts, including LAUSD, and so many teachers from LAUSD elementary classrooms were included in the Teacher Advisory Council. We are also working directly in partnership with LA's Best, which is the main provider pre-COVID of all kinds of after-school and enrichment programming. During COVID, LA's Best is coordinating all of the meal and aid and resource delivery to public district students. And so that's another like really critical partnership for us, making sure that our work is responsive to community need. And so, yeah, absolutely, that partnership is so essential. And then, you know, in answer to your question about sort of connection to other cultural institutions, it's robust and it exists. And I think this is a place where it's important to note how much broader Skirball Cultural Center's programming and community connection is than the museum, right? Because a lot of the connections that I would describe as being essential to our sort of community education and cross-cultural exchange are in our relationship with, you know, music programs and our relationships with community organizations. There's an incredible talk series right now, series of lectures and conversations right now that we're hosting called LA Reflections, which is Skirball hosting dialogue among cultural leaders from interdisciplinary institutions like Skirball, and then from a really diverse array of arts and culture institutions, everything from libraries to Center Theater Group, right? In the conversation about how art and expression are both impacted by and responding to this moment of extreme challenge. And so you see a lot of that interchange happening both through Skirball platforms and because of our existing networks. And then the last thing that I think has been underutilized in the past, and I'm very excited to expand going forward, is the connection that we have to community organizations through hospitality and events. So anybody who's been to Skirball campus or really lived in LA for any amount of time knows that you can have all kinds of lovely events on our campus. You can have your gala dinner or your auction or your awards ceremony. You know, we have these beautiful event spaces. And what people don't know is that more than 40% of our site rentals are rented at cost to community organizations whose missions align with ours. So when I was at Bethesda, for example, I would ask Skirball for assistance anytime, you know, if I had a board retreat or if I was having a cocktail reception, and I knew that Skirball would be a partner for Bethesda in hosting those events. And we would always be welcomed and we would be given an opportunity to do something like much more beautiful and luxurious than we could afford at another venue. And so it's not just Betsedic, it's the Los Angeles Urban League, and it's neighborhood legal services, and it's, you know, the food bank. And, you know, it's actually been really fun every time I get on the phone with someone that I think is connected to Skirball because they're a donor or because they're interested in art and culture. They inevitably have a story for me about another nonprofit that they're involved with that always has their fill in the blank annual tradition dinner there. And so I think what we haven't done enough of and can do more of in the future is thinking about how our connections to community organizations through all of that private engagement is also part of how we inform ourselves and the community about the work we're trying to accomplish.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, we have but 1 minute before I turn the table back to Perla, and so I'm going to pull a wild card out of my own pocket. And that is to say, as the dutiful historian, before coming to this event, I did some digging on your backgrounds, and Rabbi Lerner introduced you so the audience had a sense of the very different paths that you have taken to the positions that you occupy. Hetty, through many, many years of curation and museum directorship and writing scholarship on cultural history and Jewish performance and museum studies. Jessie, through social justice and legal work. But one of the things I discovered that you have in common is a long time commitment to dance. And I wondered if you could speak about how your work, your time as dancers might inform the choreography, let us say, of Jewish museum and cultural institutional work, or even thinking about the movement visitors might take either physically or remotely to and through your spaces. Jessie, would you like to take a stab?
Sure. I was very young when I danced. My dance career ended at 18 due to injury, like most dancers. So it's been a long time. But I think a couple of things that I have taken with me, you know, the first is I remind people, I do a lot of public speaking. And people often tell me, oh, you're such a natural public speaker. And I said, I don't know what you mean, but I've been performing since I was 3. My first Nutcracker at the Opera House, I was 3 years old. I'm a big believer in the idea that practice does, in fact, improve your performance. And so I think one thing that I took always with me from the diligence and commitment and dedication that serious dance requires is, you know, there is no substitute for hard work. And then, you know, the other thing that I take with me is something that I've craved ever since and haven't found until I've returned into the arts, which is the community of artists, folks who are so singularly focused on one type of expression. For dancers, you know, it's ephemeral. You have a very short period of time in which to do this in your life. And now to be back among creative folks and see that kind of commitment to expression and to one another and to the community of artistry, I just admire it so much. I love it. And I'm just feel so grateful that I'm in a position to support it now. And so, yeah, just thrilled to be back in this world.
Thank you. Hetty?
Yeah, it's very nice. I first trained to become a ballet teacher, and I also did ballet since I was 4, I think. And then I studied theater studies and or performance studies. And what I can take also, I've also taken into my museum work is the act of performance. I mean, an exhibition is also kind of performance, and the visitors move instead of that the people on stage move. The stage is set, and the visitors move and find their way, make their own choreography, because visitors never do what you intend in making an exhibition. And so that there I feel a very big connection there. And for myself also the perseverance and discipline that you need for dancing has helped me through my entire working life and also normal life, and it certainly does now as well. So I think these are that is a useful thing you learn from dancing, and I still love to dance, at parties.
Wonderful. And we can see that you both still carry the posture of dancers trained young. So it's been wonderful to be in conversation with you and to listen to you be in conversation with each other. I want to return the proverbial podium back to Perla for some closing words.
This has been so enlightening for me, and I'm sure for all of our viewers. And what I have come away with is realizing that we're connected through the arts. That has been my life's work, and it seems also your life's work. So thank you so much for enlightening us, for illuminating the subject of museums. And I hope that you'll tune in again to our next program. Stay safe, shalom, and goodbye.